Stranger Things wasn't born in Hawkins. It started as a pitch called Montauk, and it got rejected again and again, until Netflix finally took the risk. No nostalgia, no warm glow, just vanishing kids, secret experiments, and a town that looks normal, until it isn't. Because if you want to understand why Stranger Things hits differently, you have to rewind to where it started. Before Hawkins, before 11, before Netflix, when it was just a forbidden idea with a dangerous name. Montauk. The forbidden blueprint, Montauk. Stranger Things didn't start as a cozy throwback. It started as something colder. The earliest version was pitched under the name Montauk, described as an 8-hour sci-fi horror epic. Not a kid's adventure, more like a psychological thriller built around government secrets, psychic children, and something tearing holes in reality. And the name wasn't random. It connects to the Montauk Project conspiracy mythology, the kind of story that claims secret experiments, mind control, and psychic research tied to a military base in Montauk, New York. Important word there is mythology. Conspiracy lore isn't proof, but it's perfect fuel for fiction because it already feels like a secret. And that original pitch felt less like entertainment and more like a file you weren't supposed to open. Rejected again and again, until Netflix said yes. What makes the origin even crazier is that the show didn't explode into the world fully formed. It was turned down repeatedly, reportedly pitched around 15 times before Netflix finally stepped in. Which means the version we all know almost didn't exist, and the version that survived didn't just get picked up. It got reshaped. Because when something is rejected that many times, the creators don't just keep the same idea. They sharpen it, they rebuild it, they make it hit harder. That's why Hawkins beat Montauk. Montauk had a problem. It was too specific, too tied to one coastline, one place, one legend. Horror becomes more powerful when it feels like it could happen anywhere, not just somewhere on a map. So the Duffers did something smarter than people realize. They moved the story inland, away from the ocean, into a town that doesn't exist but feels like it should. Hawkins, Indiana. And once Hawkins replaced Montauk, the story didn't lose its darkness. It made it worse. Because now the supernatural wasn't emerging from a creepy coastline. It was invading suburbia. It was tearing through grocery stores, school dances, and quiet streets, making the horror feel more intimate, more invasive, and more terrifying. Why the 80s never feel like a costume. A lot of shows decorate themselves with an era. Stranger Things doesn't. It uses the 1980s like a weapon. The Duffers didn't choose the 80s because it looked cool. They chose it because it felt vulnerable. In that era's supernatural stories, kids weren't side characters. They were heroes. Small people standing in front of enormous fear. And that contrast made everything feel more powerful. That's why the bikes, the flashlights, and the dark suburban streets don't feel decorative. They feel meaningful. They represent a time when imagination and danger lived side by side. The show isn't recreating the 80s as fashion. It's recreating what it felt like to be a kid then, when the world felt huge, mysterious, and just a little unsafe. The logo that warns you. If the story is supposed to feel like a half-remembered nightmare, even the branding has to feel like it came from another era. The Stranger Things typeface was inspired by vintage Stephen King book covers, especially the ITC Benguiat font that once dominated horror paperbacks. Those letters didn't just sit on the page, they loomed. They promised danger before you ever turned the first page. That's why the logo glows into existence instead of snapping into place. The red lines slowly slide together as if something is being summoned. It doesn't feel modern. It feels forbidden. The typography doesn't just reference horror, it conditions you for it. Hawkins is fictional, but you can visit it. Hawkins might not exist, but you can walk through it. Most of Stranger Things was filmed in Georgia, around Atlanta, with the town of Jackson becoming the face of Hawkins. The streets, the houses, the schools, all of it is real. That's why the town feels lived in instead of staged. It feels like a place that existed long before the camera arrived, which makes it even creepier when the impossible starts happening inside it. Hawkins' lab exists, and it feels wrong. Even Hawkins' lab, the most secretive place in the show, is a real location. It was filmed at Emory University's Briarcliff campus, an eerie complex that once held hospitals and institutions. There's a weight to that place, a quiet heaviness that seeps into the scenes. And there's something unsettling about knowing these buildings existed long before the show, holding real people and real stories, before becoming home to fictional experiments and monsters. As the show grew, though, Hawkins could no longer contain it. The story had to go bigger, the mall that became a trap. Season 3 needed a symbol of 80s America so loud it practically screams. So the show leaned into the mall era. Bright lights, consumer dreams, safe energy, and fake comfort. Because that's the Stranger Things trick. Make the surface feel fun, then reveal what's rotting underneath. The mall becomes a disguise, a neon shell hiding something monstrous below. It's the show in one location. The surface is nostalgia. The underside is a nightmare when the story left America. Season 4 took Stranger Things somewhere it had never gone before. Outside the country. The brutal Kamchatka prison wasn't built in a studio. It was filmed inside Lukiškės prison in Vilnius, Lithuania. A real historic prison that held inmates for over a century. The cold stone walls, the narrow corridors, the oppressive silence. None of it had to be faked. Using a real prison changed everything. The cast wasn't pretending to feel trapped. They were inside a place that had trapped people for decades. That physical reality makes every scene heavier, more exhausting, more real. The Upside Down is built to be touched. The Upside Down doesn't feel like CGI because it isn't just CGI. The buyer's house was engineered so it could become its dark mirror. Walls could be removed, surfaces could be swapped, rot, vines, and slime could be added directly to the set. Actors weren't standing in front of green screens. They were walking through decay, and that physicality changes everything. When a character touches a wall or steps into the darkness, they're interacting with something real. Digital effects enhance it later, but the foundation is always tangible. That's why the Upside Down feels like a place that could trap you, not just a visual effect. The monsters are built, not just rendered. The Demogorgon wasn't born on a computer. It was sketched, sculpted, and designed like a real creature, treated like an animal that needed anatomy, movement, and weight. That's why it feels present. Vecna followed the same philosophy. Jamie Campbell Bower spent 7 hours a day in prosthetics. Every crack in his skin was physical. Digital effects only enhanced what was already there. You're not watching someone pretend to be afraid of a monster. You're watching them share a space with one. The lights, the music, and the cultural takeover. The Christmas lights wall was never meant to look that insane. At first, it was simple. Then the creators saw it and said, more. More lights, more flickering, more chaos. They wired the lights so they could twinkle on cue, turning Joyce's wall into a living communication system. Winona Ryder had to perform inside that technical storm, crying, shouting, and breaking down for hours to capture Joyce's desperation. Her exhaustion wasn't acting. It was real. That's why the scene hurts to watch. And Stranger Things doesn't use music as background. It uses it as emotion. Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill didn't just return. It exploded again decades after release because of one scene. Even Eggo waffles became a real-world phenomenon. That's cultural power. And the story is finally finished. Now the only thing left is the aftermath. Fans replaying the final moments, arguing over choices, and deciding whether the goodbye landed. And Netflix is pulling back the curtain with a behind-the-scenes documentary, One Last Adventure, showing how the final season was built and what it took to close the door for good. Stranger Things began as a pitch called Montauk. It became a town called Hawkins, and it ended as one of the most powerful stories television has ever told. Built from real places, real monsters, and real emotion, it feels less like a show and more like something we weren't supposed to find. And maybe that's why it stays with us. Because the best stories don't feel created, they feel discovered. Now the only question is whether the ending can live up to the feeling the show created. Because the hardest thing in television isn't opening a door to another world, it's closing it. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe.